Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start. Okay, as I announced last time, now it's the turn of the old ladies. We have presented, as you remember, the theme of old age with old men, and I thought this was a different subject. I could not mix both, and you will see, because even if you go back to the tradition of this type of representation, the motivation that you had for representing whole gentlemen could not be applied right away to old age in a feminine sense. You remember, for instance, one of this motivation was to give homage to predecessors, to fathers, masters, and things like that. And so there was, in the past, there was so little amount of woman painter, for instance, they will not have referred to another woman as their master. It will be a kind of very rare occurrence. And also the motivation to get some patronage, because you can show that even if you are old, you're still good, you still know how to paint, also doesn't apply much here. And in fact, you will see there's two trends. There's a trend which is rather derogatory, in which you will present old age in women in a kind of negative fashion. And then, because of the pressure of certain mythological and biblical subject, we will have to represent it in a more positive way. This is what I will try to evoke by few images to start with, and then we will go to our Canadian stuff to see how it was translated. So, first, this more negative type of presentation. Here in the famous probably the most famous representation of a old lady done in the Renaissance by Giorgione, so it's the Venetian Renaissance, and he called it La Vecchia, which means the old one, and without too much nuance. There is, so you see, she seems to appear behind a kind of maybe a window or something like that. You have a kind of, the bottom of the picture, you see a kind of a little lintel there or something. She pointed to herself, she opened her mouth as if she was to speak, to say something, and what she wants to say is written on the little piece of paper that she have near her hand. And it's, if you read it, it's written col tempo, with time. That's what happened with time. And so it was a kind of motto that you find in poetry of the time very often, of the impermanence of life and this kind of thing like this. There is a hesitation about the exact meaning of the picture if you go to, let's see, if you consult a little bit the archives around it. What I mean by that, you have at certain period inventories of collection, you know, so a collector will have an author come and describe all the painting that he have, and he will give title to them. So, for instance, in this case, we have few of these inventory, but they don't agree each other, as if, say, with time, people hesitate on the real meaning of it and transform it. So, for instance, there's one in 1569 who described it as La Madre di Giorgione, so the mother of Giorgione. So that, of course, will be touching in a way that her son represents his mother as a kind of somebody from the proletariat class, and she doesn't look at all rich. And so that was one explanation. In 1601, in another inventory by another collector, because the painting changed from hand to hand, she's called only Donna Vecchia, meaning old lady, as if in the meantime they forgot that she could have been the mother of Giorgione. And then they had something, it was interesting, I will read it in Italian, but it's easy to, I will translate it right away. It says, il coperto del dito quadro, the cover of this painting, of this quadro, like we say in French Canada also, un cadre, to designate a painting. That's always beyond me, just a frame, you know. What is this, what is important is what's inside. But anyway, quadro, dipinto con un uomo con una vesta di lepela negra. Also, what he says, this painting was covered by another one in which you have the depiction of a man with a black fur, as if you have a double painting. This is strange, of course, because then it's not something that is common. It's not two paintings side by side, it's one cover by the other. And then later on, you have again other description. And in the 19th century, she's called the Madre di Tiziano. She changed, she's become now the mother of Tizian. So there was always this hesitation on the meaning. But I think the most interesting description is the one who is more, a little bit, who speak of this coperto, of this cover, what it was. It was apparently, you have a usage, and it's well attested, but it have disappeared, of course, today and even early, of presenting as a kind of opposition between two themes. You will have, for instance, a portrait of a young man associated with an old woman like this. And so one will cover the other, and you will show it like this, and you say, oh, look at the difference. Look, this one is beautiful, this one is ugly, or something. And there was even a system in which you could, it was called a tirella, in which you could slide one painting above the other. And that's probably what he meant when he says coperto. There was a portrait of a man in a black fur, and the old lady under, let's say that almost as a kind of vicious joke, you open, and what is interesting also, the opposition is not between a young lady and an old one. It is between a man and a woman, a young man and an old woman. And this, you have behind this, of course, a kind of conception of beauty that is typical of the Renaissance. Beauty is masculine. It's a little bit like with the birds. The male birds is more beautiful than the female one. But they have this idea, and there's a whole tradition stressing that. For instance, in Leonardo da Vinci, the precetti of the kind of recipe, I would say, the kind of advice that he gives to his student, he will suggest that in a good painting, you should make opposition between old and young and ugly. And so I just read you a little passage of this, and you will see it's exactly what he means. He says, it also say that in the narrative paintings, one ought to mingle direct contraries so that they afford a great contrast to one to the other. And all the more when they are in close proximity. So if you can put the two personages very close one to the other, like here, one of biking. You say, for instance, the ugly next to the beautiful, the big to the small, the old to the young, that will be our case, the strong to the weak, and in this way you will vary as much and as close together as possible. And this, of course, you can illustrate first in religious picture, and I think this is a very good example of that. The only beautiful people there are Jesus with bearing the cross, and Veronica on the left down there, who is the one who have the famous veil, in which the face of Christ was supposed to be imprinted. And all the rest are awful caricature of people, as exaggerated as you can. So it's really the opposition between the ugly and the beautiful, but there for a religious purpose to stress the difference between Christ and his prosecutors. You see the aim of this. And Hieronymus Bosch, of course, it's one of these famous paintings that he did. It could be seen as an excellent example of that. I was mentioning Leonardo da Vinci. You see here, again, the opposition between a young and a old man in a drawing. And even in Giorgione, you have the theme of the series of lectures that I give this year, the stage of life. You have an old man, you have a child, and you have an adult. You have the three stages of life like this represented, and also always the opposition between young and old, but also less beautiful and more beautiful. You have always that. And if in the work of Giorgione, we could imagine what was this man dressed in black fur, or at least which kind of man will be on the coperto of the old woman. Probably it was something like that, a kind of very idealized masculine figure, not feminine, and very idealized like this, like to oppose, let's say, these two these two aspects. So that's one of the trends, let's say, where you use the representation of an old woman to enhance, let's say, the representation of younger or more beautiful others. Then there is, of course, the iconography itself that will impose certain subject. I think of religious iconography. For instance, you cannot represent Saint Anne without a certain dignity. After all, she's the grandmother of Christ. She's the mother of the Virgin. So you have to be careful. You cannot represent her as La Vecchia. And the same with mythology. There is at least one aspect of the of Greek and Roman mythology where you have a theme where that impose the idea of representing an old woman. And I will give you a striking example of that. It is in this picture of Bellotti that represent one of the three fates. You know what is the idea? It is that our fate, in fact, are in the hands of three old ladies who are somewhere in heaven, and they hold the thread of life. So one put it on the spindle. This is Lachesis. This is the one. And that's why you see near her spindles, and behind her also a series of them. So for each one of us, we have a little spindle like that. She's the one. And then there is another one who's called Clotho, who just give you the thread that correspond to your life. And then finally, there's Atropos that cut it, is the older one, and nobody can stop them. No gods can intervene in that. This is the fate. This is the mektum. It's written, and that's it. That's your lifetime. So here, the subject matter is inspired by mythology. Of course, Bellotti probably hired some model or something like that, an old lady, but it's very, very moving. It's very striking. It's not at all like the Vecchia. And I remember having read in Philip Sohn, it's an art historian who have written a fascinating book about old age of painter, how they represent themselves. So he reproduced this thing, and this is his comment about this. He says, many early modern paintings, okay, he used the word modern in the sense of starting with the Renaissance, you see, not starting with the 19th century or 20th. Many early modern paintings of old women are suspended between parody, dignity, and tragedy. Because the deformity of old age poignantly recalls the beauty of lost youth. Wrinkles in these paintings take an iconic status, transforming soft flesh into dried and cracked mud river with fissures. And if you get a little bit closer to the picture, I think it's an excellent description of what you see. The wrinkle becomes like really dried up and create this fascinating portrait. Very, with a lot of subtlety and things. They look at her eyes. There's a sadness, but also a certain courage. It's a very interesting and complex picture. Okay, so what happened with our Canadian, and when you try to situate them in this context? The first example I will show you are related to portrait of nuns. And this is not surprising because if you go back in the time, there was this usage of making posthumous portrait of sisters, of religious women. Why posthumous? Because during their lifetime, it was an expression of vanity to have your portrait done, so it was not done. But when you were died, you could not protest, so habitually they bring the painter near the deathbed, and he could execute a portrait of the Mother Superior or whatever people. And this is probably one of the most beautiful and most famous one. It's a portrait of Marguerite Bourgeois. So it's, and it's quite old. It's 1700, well, quite old for us in Canada, but let's say it's kind of very early portrait with the kind of quite strong. It's a small little thing. It's not, don't imagine it's too big. And it's a portrait that have a kind of complicated story. Because up to 1963, it was completely unknown. Nobody had seen it before 1963. But we knew that it existed because in the archives of the Sister of the Congregation of Notre Dame, you have a text in which they describe the circumstances in which, when the portrait was done. And I will read a translation of it. You will see how it happened. It says, Monsieur Lebert. So Lebert is the name of the painter. Monsieur Lebert, son, having been asked to make the portrait of our dear mother, of Sir Bourgeois, a little after she died, so it's really a posthumous portrait, a little after she died, came at our place for that purpose, but after having received the Eucharist in her honor in our chapel, he got such a headache that he could not do it. One of our sisters gave him then a little bit of hair of our dear mother, and that he put under his wig, and he felt immediately good, much better, and started to work with much easiness that everyone who saw him were obliged to admire it. Having kept the hair of our mother, he is convinced that he was saved 2 days after from a serious accident where he could have broken his head. This is wonderful. Try to get hairs of saint people, it could save your life. Anyway, this is, so we knew that there was a portrait of her because of that, because of this little story, that Lebert is well identified. It's a painter of the time, and would have been asked to do this. But what happened with time, it is that the paint, maybe 2 centuries after that it was done, at the beginning of 1900 or something like that, people began to think that this is naive, this is not a good painting, maybe this is really not proper, you know, that as if it was too simple or done by somebody without any training. And he decided to improve it. And so what you do then, you do what we call a repeint. That means you put some white paint on it, and then you redo it in a way that is closer to the fashion of the day. And what happened is this. It was so repainted that suddenly she doesn't look like her at all. And this picture was the one we knew up to 1963. And nobody has seen the other one. It was the only one who was the sister Marguerite Bourgeois. And we thought it was done by Lebert in 1700. Then around the beginning of the 60s, the nuns began to be suspicious about the painting. And the funny thing, it is this painting also have been the source of many engravings. I think I have a few examples of that, in which you see them, for instance, in History of Canada. She will be represented like this. And of course, it's inspired from the painting I just showed you. And if we go back to it, you will see what happened. So they began to be suspicious a little bit of that, and the sister Myriam du Temple, who is the superior at the time in the 60s, wonderful person, she decided to consult some art historian to know their advice about it. And she consulted Jean Palardy. You know Palardy is the guy who wrote the famous book on the furniture of Canada and all this. And Palardy he says, no, that cannot be a 1700 painting. It's too, a little bit too soft, and it have no character whatsoever. He says it have been retouched and things like that. You should not, you should have it examined, in fact. So they decided to do it. They contacted a restorer of New York, Monsieur Corani. And Corani says, well, what you have to do first, if it is really repainted, you take an X-ray of the picture, and you can see under the upper layer if there is something else under. So that's what he did. And I will show you the X-ray. The X-ray was that. And the X-ray was not very revealing. Why? Because he discovered that the painter who have made the repaint, who have retouched it, have used white lead. And lead is impenetrable to X-ray. It's like opaque, and so opaque that the X-ray cannot go through it. So what he was saying, in fact, it was just an earlier representation of the same picture that we saw. So he says, I have to scratch this, I have to remove these layers, and maybe to found under the other picture. But then there was a dilemma. Two things could happen. Or you scratch it, and under there's nothing because the people before have really cleaned it completely, put a white lead layer, and then repainted on it. So you lose even your bad portrait, but at least it was a portrait. Or you discover something, and then you find the real portrait of Marguerite Bourgeois. So Myriam du Temple, Sister Myriam du Temple, decided, let's go on. Better to have no portrait than a false one. Wow, great. So they did it. And Korani says to them, after the cleaning and everything, he says that he discovered there was 3 layers of white lead who have been put all at the beginning of this century, probably by the nuns themselves. They don't mention it, but probably, very probably. And because of this change of taste, in fact. And you do have, about at this time, in 1850 to 90, people of certain authority, like l'Abbé Fayon, who will say, Lebert was a very pious man, but he was not a very good painter. And others will say, yeah, he was the first really to study painting, but others have made better painting since. So all these kind of wisecrack about Lebert, of course, have hindered his reputation and have created the need to changing it. But happily now, what we have, wait a minute, happily now what we have is this picture, which is really powerful, it's really extraordinary, and I've been completely clean from the other one. What we lost, of course, is the false one. And then there was some restoration to be done. You could imagine that some speck of paint fell, and there was it was glued on a cupboard, was glued on a masonite, and so they have to recanvas it and to put it properly. Anyway, this can be all done, and now it is kept in the Congregation Notre-Dame de Montréal in their little museum. And it's there, the gem of the collection, of course. And so you have here an image of a very powerful old lady, but with dignity and not at all in the context of the La Vecchia or something like that. It's really one of the better posthumous portraits of early New France, let's say, that we know. Okay, so then I have also this portrait of, to stay with the nuns. Another one, this person is less maybe appealing, but she was also a very good sister. She was, in fact, the superior of the Grey Nuns for a while, Sœur Coutelet. And having been in charge of the business of the Grey Nuns for a long time, she had created a lot of studios, you see, to make money for the community. Like they had a gilding studio where they were making gilt on statues or any ornament for the church. They have embroidery, like you see her doing. She used a kind of red pelt, and she embroidered flowers on it, and apparently this was a type of not so much ornament for the church, but things that were sold to the natives. They liked this type of presentation, and she had, according to the picture of Dulompré here, you could say that she had the style that they liked. So that was like to create a new type of clientele, say, with the native, with the First Nation people. And she have also a studio for making candles and even for host, for the mass and things like that. So with all these little studios, they succeeded to make enough money to have this huge community. As you know, us in Concordia, we are now mixed with this very close because we bought the Grey Nuns convent at Concordia. And it will be transformed in a kind of pavilion for the university. But when you visit it, the first thing that struck you is the immensity, the bigness of that. There are thousands of rooms, and it was very prosperous for a long time. And so this is certainly one case of representation of old woman in a very, very defined type of frame. Then I asked myself, okay, let's see if we go out of convent and we see how they were represented in kind of more, I would say, secular type of surrounding. The first thing that I thought, even if we would stay still very close to religion, It was the series of image done by this Joseph Edmond Massicotte. Massicotte is not a great painter. He's rather an illustrator, if you want. But like many people with this type of inkling, who wants to show you the good old days and want to be close to the usage of the past, like here, the prayer, the family prayer, at prayer, he will try to document himself as much as possible, almost like an ethnographer, I would say. So you see all the family on their knees in front of a little picture of probably the sacred art, and then the more striking figure there is the grandmother, okay, which is the more colorful also in terms of her dress. She's the only one who have the rosary, and is probably the one who tell it, who say the prayers, and the other answer them. You know, this will be replaced later by Cardinal Léger, who will do it on the radio instead of having it like this. And I remember in my youth, my mother insisted that we listen to le rosaire en famille du Cardinal Léger. That was like things that we could not avoid. But anyway, but this people seems very pious. But then, okay, what I wanted to follow from one illustration to the other of Massicotte, it is the role that he gave to the whole lady there, to the grandmother. You will see here, for instance, she's really central. She's the pillar of religion. And she's in foreground, and she occupied as much space as the mother. Let's say the two are the important women there. Men are in the back, and they are quiet. They do what they are told to do, but they are not prominent there. Okay, here is another aspect. Well, you will see again the role that they give to the whole grandmother. It's called it's the midnight supper. Of course, it's at Christmas, in the middle of the night, at 12, you have a little réveillon, and this is what is represented here by this same guy, this Edmond Massicotte. And in a previous version of the same picture, done in 1905, so a few years before, he gave another title to it. It's called The Late Comer. And the late comer, of course, is the guy is completely on the left there. You see a man coming with his coat and with ceinture fléchée around this kind of belt around his waist. He still has his hat in his hand, so he's late. He's coming late. So that's why the grandfather stand up and showed him a place where to sit. And all the family are pointing to him, are looking in that direction. He just happened. He looks a little bit idiot, but anyway, he come like this late for the midnight supper. And if you notice then the role of the woman, most of them are standing, and none of them have a chair for them, because the only empty chair on the left is for the grandfather, of course. He will show the chair to the latecomer, and then he will sit himself. But the whole lady is in the back. You see her a little bit to the right. She's standing and looking at what's happening. And then the mother is completely to the right. And you have a little girl also in the foreground who have no seats. Why? Because they are serving, of course. They are in between the kitchen and the dining room. And they are working then at this period. The grandmother is interesting because she's a little bit apart. She's a little bit... Now, when somebody come in these pictures, you will see other examples that I will show you after. When somebody come from the exterior, she's a little bit receding, as if, whoop, this is somebody invade my domesticity, my place where I'm a queen in a way. Not somebody's coming from outside, I have to be quiet. And one last little detail here was, at first was troubling. It is the shadows of people. If you look, for instance, the latecomer have a shadow just behind him. And then you have a kind of guy who makes a very strange gesture. He goes like this with his knife in his hand. Says, hello, hello. Bon. It's a little bit impolite. But look at the shadow that this hands with the knife does. It's huge. Right? It's like behind her. And the other big shadow is the shadow of the grandmother, but in the other direction. And at first I said, okay, Massicotte s'est trompé, he didn't get it. No, it is because the source of light it is the oil lamp who is on the table. And of course, since it's the middle of the table, it will make shadows in both directions on each side. You understand how the picture was constructed. Okay, another example that, again, very clear. All this, of course, stressed the presence of religion in every scene, I would say almost. But here again is the benediction of the grandfather at the New Year's Day. I remember I've been through this also. We were all nervous about it, and he was nervous also. He was going like this, and we thought that maybe some rays will fall on us from the ceiling. But then again, you have the opposition between people coming from outside and people from inside. The people who are on their knees are from outside. They are probably part of the family, but nevertheless, they don't live there. That's why they stay all dressed like that. And the grandmother is in the back again, probably trying to calm one of the baby, because again, always the big family are stressed in these pictures, always French-Canadian. It was, do you know this expression, la revanche des berceaux? A way to get above the Anglos were to make more babies than them, you know. It was not very brilliant, but anyway, this was what our vicar were telling us to do. On va la revanche des berceaux. We will, the cradles will revenge against the other. Well, anyway, so she's in the back like this again, because when you have this intrusion of people from outside, she becomes to be more put aside. Again, a good example of that also, it is this visit of the New Year Day in the good old days. It's always, all this is in the good old days, of course, in which the grandmother is completely to the left. And she even put her hand in front of her mouth like this, as if she was a little bit shy or excluded a little bit of what's happening. What is happening is, of course, all the people from the village, always all dressed up, you know, with their hats in their hands, are coming to pay respect to each family. They go from one houses to the other, and everybody does it. And probably also the fact that in the middle, the man who is shaking the hand of the wife is really a little bit too close. He was probably on the verge of giving her a kiss, and the grandmother doesn't approve that too much, and so she's put on the back. But the grandfather seems interested in what will happen if you see him on the left. And so it's always all these pictures are not great art, but I think they are interesting in terms of the conception of the relationship between the people in this type of rural setting. And here is one of the places where the grandmother seems to be well integrated in the family. She's sitting completely to the right in a kind of rocking chair, and we have given her some pillows, you know, to be comfortable and all that. And it is the famous supper of Epiphany, in which the mother comes with a cake. And I don't know if you had this usage, but we used to have a cake in which there was a pea and a bean inside. And the one who found the pea was the king, and the one who found the beans was the queen. And we received little crown, and we were applauded and things like that. It was kind of little things like that. We always watch for our teeth also. It was terrible to bite on this damn peas and to get toothache after. But anyway, and but you see, then the grandmother is completely integrated in the picture. You remember when we spoke, I think 2 or 3 lectures before, of the importance in rural type of community. The importance is more of the relationship between the people than the relationship of an individual with things. And I think this is a good illustration of that. In fact, the personages there are really stereotyped, as if you could change them by anything. You could transform the man there or the woman differently. You can present them differently, and it will not change much of the meaning of the picture. Meaning that the real meaning here, it is the relationship between the people and not what they are in themselves. They are not portraits of people. They are just there as more like an idea And so, on one hand, you have a lot of meaning, because all this, of course, is a very well-defined type of usage, and where everybody has his place and already should know how to behave and all that. So, in terms of values and in terms of signification of the picture, it is very clear. But on the other hand, what we lose, it is the individuality of people involved. They could be replaced by any other type of personage. You understand that there is a trade-off there. Okay, you stress the relationship, but then you lose a little bit the individuality of people. They become more stereotyped, and they are less interesting as such. They are interesting by their relationship rather than by the way they look. Because we find from one picture to the other the same type of personage and with other roles, but always, okay. So when you go in contrast with this to some of the picture of old women done by César-Côté, you see a completely different approach there. Because now we are dealing with one individual, and we don't even know what she's doing. Probably she's reading. She could be absorbed in some thought or something like that. We don't know. We don't have clues. We have her name, Madame Gauthier. And then you lose in terms of meaning, but you get in terms of individuality. And the moment you get this, you get a more tragic type of figure. Because if you are out of this network of values and meaning, even if these values and meaning doesn't mean anything to us today, let's say, all these rural things, all these usage are passé, if you want. But nevertheless, when you remove that, you are facing the human condition, I would say, almost in its absurdity. You have nothing, you have no meaning suddenly. You are just an old person facing death. And that's why suddenly these pictures looks much more tragic, because now we're dealing with an individual. You are not dealing with the world of relationship between people in which usage and values are well defined. And I think César-Côté felt that. And he felt also the danger of this. That's it, that if we go too far in that direction, then we become to have to face this absurdity, this kind of no sense in our life. And he will try to find a certain way to redeem this type of figure. But before that, I will show you another example. Madame Moreau, or La Mère Moreau, like he called her. This is a fantastic charcoal drawing done by César-Côté, in which, look at this face of this woman. It's very complex. She's suspicious a little bit of the painter. She doesn't know. She's losing her time, what is this and what this will give us. And on the other hand, she looks like a very good person, very devoted to her family, that she has worked all her life. And so you have many layers of meaning like this, but also the same type of tragedy that we have before. This Madame Moreau, we don't know exactly what will happen of her. And if you see, he did also a portrait of her husband, of Monsieur Moreau. They put them, you can put them side by side like this. He looks quiet. He looks not too troubled and not too complex like her. And it is because, as you remember, César-Côté will ask this old man to represent, in fact, the idea of the French-Canadian race, in bracket, because in 1910 they used this term all the time. And for him, that was a pioneer. This was a guy who created the whole region of Athabasca there. And so he's happy in his life. He have a good definition. He have meaning, but not the wife. The meaning of the wife was to make children and to help a little bit to help in the house, not a little bit, but to do everything in the house. When she gets much too old, she cannot have children, but she cannot do the work that she used to do and become to lose this meaning. So the whole man will keep it because he becomes a symbol in a way. And he becomes an incarnation, like the journalists of the time, of the French-Canadian soul. When you speak of soul, you are in the symbolic world. You are somewhere out of reality. And so for the man, it's okay. And you see how he looks. He looks sure of himself, as if he will tell story of the good old time and things like that, but not her. She is facing something else. She's facing a much more tragic type of development, if you want, in her life. And then you will see that César Côté will make a sculpture of her in which he's trying to redeem this type of thing. I mean by that he wants to give a certain transcendence to this figure. Transcendence meaning that she will be able to go over her worry or her, I would say, ontological type of worry. And he will make a plaster cast of her like this, in which most of the wariness and the hesitation that you have in a charcoal drawing becomes to disappear. She looks more sure of herself. And finally, he made a bronze sculpture of her in which he tilted the head a little bit. She's looking now up, and you could say now she's becoming more an idea also. She's becoming more a symbol. She becoming, in fact, a symbol of religion, as if the only thing that can give meaning to the woman life at this stage is religion, is afterlife. It's what the recompense that you will have in heaven after. And to prove that, I think also you have this little sculpture that he made that to my mind is less interesting, of the old pioneer wife. You remember I showed you the pendant, the masculine pendant, the last lecture. Now you have her. She's knitting and doing, and she have no face to speak about. It's almost become like a little bibelot, you know, that you could put to hold books together or something like that. It's less interesting. Alors, this process of redeeming the existential weariness that you have in the charcoal drawing have, in a way, destroy a little bit her meaningful. She's like a little bit this drawing of Franchère, you know, in which you see an old lady knitting even when she sleeps, as if the whole habit is so strong that even in her sleep she could continue to knit. And it's an illustration of a book by Chanoine Groux, which is called Le Repaillage, and which is not a very great book anyway, but he goes back to this kind of stereotype like this. And then, okay, then you realize that we are losing the individuality of the person. We are losing her own self, let's say, to get closer to an idea of I would say, devotion, such great devotion that it could even go beyond sleep and beyond life. In fact, even in her death, she will still knit endlessly for us. Okay, so this, in fact, you have to wait to find the same powerful impact that we had in the first drawings of César Côté. You have to wait a little bit later to find it more modern painter, the same type of approach. Like here, this Kathleen Daly. Kathleen Daly is not a very well-known painter, but she writes a beautiful little book on James Wilson Morris. It's the way I discovered her is through her book on Morris. And then I was curious to know what she painted, and at the Centre d'Art of Baie-Saint-Paul, they receive a huge collection of her work, and because she works in the region of Charlevoix all her life, and she was the wife of another painter who's called David Pepper, and so it's a couple that used to go to Charlevoix. And here she make she's one of the rare English painter, Anglo-speaking painter, who succeeded to make contact with these people, with a peasant of the region. I mean personal contact, like here, she's in the house. If you think of painting by Jackson or Lismer of this region, you see whole barns very far, and you don't see any people around. They don't have contact with people. They are visiting there, they are looking at the landscape and all that, but they don't have this type of contact that you have here. And here she represents, okay, Mrs. Bradette, like she call her, at home. It is the old lady that you see on the foreground on the right. She do nothing, and she's not knitting. She's just lost in her thought. And she's sitting in front of an empty chair, of course, of her whole husband, who died before her. And she's thinking of death, it's evident. I think and it creates a kind of calm in all the composition. Even the mother and the child in the back are not doing anything either, and they are quiet. And then the rest, it's all the parlophone, that you could imagine in an old, poor house, a French-Canadian house of the region of Baie-Saint-Paul, in which you see this big stove with 2 levels, and then the pipes are going through the room there to heat the place, of course, and even the big black cross there, you know what it is. It's the La Croix de la Tempérance. Huh? They were, that's people who have no drinks, no alcoholic drinks in their house. When they have this big cross, that was a sign that don't ask for a gin there, there's none. Huh? Okay. And they were cokes in that thing. You remember maybe the painting by Krieghoff showing, in the contrary, French Canadian drinking like crazy and baking merry and all that. Well, it's the same type of situation in which you see the two sides. Huh? Or you have these tempérance things, or you have the things about which the tempérance was reacting. Huh? And people used to say, oh, well, Krieghoff make jokes about French Canadian. I don't think so. I think he showed the French Canadian resisting to their priests and to their ideology that we're trying to impose on them. I don't know. You have possibly 2 readings of that. Okay, so what happened now if we quit the rural area and we see what I would call more bourgeois type of painting? And then you will see, again, a big difference. This is an old painting of 1793, so a few years after the English conquest, representing Madame Trottier d'Iderivière. She's Marguerite Mayotte. This is her name as a name, Marguerite Mayotte, but she's married to a Monsieur Trottier d'Iderivière. She's represented there with a snuff box, and she has a beautiful tea set near her. And she has around her neck a little medallion, and on the medallion, if you look at the picture more closely than just in the reproduction, is the portrait of her husband. So it's a good girl. Yeah, I will speak of the husband a little bit later. You will see. This he's a different guy. Anyway, and so Malpart de Beaucourt is one of the very early Canadian-born painter who've been to Europe to learn his craft. He was in Bordeaux, especially, and he came back. And you may have seen from him a portrait of a black girl, of a black slave, that is at the McCord Museum. That's very famous by Beaucourt. It's the same guy. And here, okay, he represents this old lady, and it's after the conquest, and it's, of course, I would say, if you define a kind of bourgeois ideology there, the way you will represent the person there, it's the relation of this person with things and not with other people. I says in the rural area, what's important is the relationship between the people. Here, in the contrary, it's what you possess, what you have. And make you, in a way, an individual also. You are no more a type, you are no more something else. You are defined by what you have. And that's why, of course, she have the snuff box and she have the tea set and everything. And also, I would say they were criticized, these bourgeois, because they were adopting English usage. Because tea was not a thing that French drink much. Even in France today, Monsieur veut du thé, oh, pas avec du lait, oh, quand même. They will discuss if you want to put the milk in the tea, this is not done. And in France, but you could do it on the other side of the Thames. But anyway, this tea mania, like they used to call, was accused of let's say, on the English influence on the French, like this Trottier d'Iderivière. For instance, very early, almost at the end of the 18th century, we find some Chinese porcelain being imported here in Canada for this usage, let's say, of tea sets and things like that. And I want to read to you a passage of a play in which the author mocked at this new usage among his French-Canadian compatriots, if you want. And it is a man who's called Joseph Quenelle, and he wrote a play which is called L'Anglomanie, ou le dîner à l'anglaise, hein, les Anglomania, or the English-style supper. And hear what he says about the tea. He says, with all that tea, says, back in our French period, when all was well, did we drink as much? Never, except as a remedy or for a migraine. But English fashion dictates that it had been taken morning and night with neither the desire nor the need. It is as if one will die if tea came to be missing. Thus, we see only pallid faces, stick stomach, lean faces, he says, instead of the former rosy complexion of the old days. Behold the result of this nonsense, he says. And so as if he was resisting to this new fashion. And here is Monsieur Trottier d'Idérivière. This is the pendant. Of course, you imagine these two pictures goes together. They are the same size, and Beaucourt got the contract to paint both of them. This is the one she have on her heart in this little medallion. You see that he's a card player. You see that the card he have in front of him is a ace of heart, maybe showing another penchant, you know, I don't know. Maybe it's not just cards. And then you have money also, is defined by this. And I show you on the right some cards of the time. You see how they look. And you know also that they use card in these days, especially during the French regime, as a kind of money. Monnaie de carte, they was calling it. So they use card to play with. They divided in four. And then the intendant was writing his name on it, as you see in the bottom picture there. This is Beauharnois. And he gave a value to the card. For instance, in this case, 12 pounds. And then when the boat came in the springtime, they could exchange the card toward money, to the real money. But with time, it get inflated, and it was very complicated. But it's the first usage in America, let's say, of paper money in that sense. It's interesting to see, especially with Trottier d'Idérivière, with this little amount of money in front of him, playing cards and showing a kind of merry side of his life. Then another absolutely striking portrait, I think, of an older woman done by Roy. And it's called A Lady from Perrault Island, so it's near Montreal. We don't know exactly who she is. There are some hypotheses, but it doesn't give much. Certainly not a poor lady. By the shawl that she has, some people say that it may come even from India. So quite, and you see in her hands, you see all her jewels also. This is an important thing. And her costume also is quite elaborated and all that. Habitually, when you speak of Roi Audi, it is the fashion to say that he's an autodidact, and somebody who never learned painting, and that he's a little bit naive because of that. And for instance, we know that he was born in a family of cabinet makers, so people working with wood, more craftsmen, let's say, than artists. Even if he followed some lessons from François Baillarger, who was a real painter and sculptor, and it didn't last much, and most of his career, I think, he learned by himself in a way. And after a while, he started to make religious pictures for churches, like many of people, but then he became to be a portraitist, and like you see here. And he was an itinerant painter. That means he was not in one place only, like in Quebec or in Montreal. He was going from village to village, offering his service, and that's why probably he went to Ile Perrot, and people said, okay, why you don't make the portrait of this lady? But when you look at her face, you will see that, in fact, it's not a naive thing. It's a very, very intricate type of person. She has irony. She has very intelligent eye. She is not afraid of the painter. She looks at him directly. and she has a strong chin, probably a person with a lot of personality. But then again, she's defined by what she has. Huh? You understand? It's always the same type of thing. I think we will have to find another way than to speak only as a naive painter about Roaoudi. I will give all the Dulompré for one Roaoudi myself. I think this is much more interesting painting than the other one. Look, an example of a painting that could recall you something that I showed you before when we were speaking of children. It is a portrait of Madame Papineau, of the wife of Papineau, Louis Joseph, Madame Julie Bruneau. Alors, here, the picture I showed you a few times ago is the one on the right, where she's with her little daughter, Zelda, and playing music and all that. And here is a portrait of the same lady, but when she's 64, much after. I don't know, it's interesting to compare both because they are not looking too much alike. I'm sure that a picture of this Boisseau, who is a photographer and is a kind of very academic type of painter, is closer to the truth, let's say, than the Plamondon, probably. But on the other hand, Plamondon is more interesting as a painter than this Boisseau. This lady have a rather tough life, because Papineau was not a good father. He was always in politics and shouting here and there and not taking care of her family too much, of his family too much. And she was the one who, she lived a long time in Europe also, separated from him. And she had quite a career, and also a musician and quite an interesting woman. Boisseau is not an important painter, but he's the type of people at the time who was in competition directly with photography. When you think of the date of that 1872, there's already photographs and what a painter can do. So they try to compete on the same level, to be as accurate and as detailed that photographer can be. But then, of course, it will be a lost battle. The photo will be cheaper than a portrait like this, and painter will finally abandon this. But he is a good case of this type of transition between the two periods. Like I would say also of this Eugène Hamel, ici. Eugène Hamel is not to be confounded with Théophile Hamel, who is a more important painter, but who painted, again, a portrait of Mrs. We know that she's called Mrs. Narcisse Lemieux, but we don't know much about her. We know that she lived on the same street than the Hamel. Both the father, Abraham Hamel, and the uncle of this Eugène Hamel, they were living all in the same vicinity. And what we think that probably because they were neighbors, Eugène decided to make the portrait of this lady and to give it to them as a kind of maybe homage like this. And again, she's defined by her jewels, by her embroidery, by the kind of costume that she has. And she looks quite sure of herself. Also, she doesn't have any complex in front of the painter. And apparently, Eugène Hamel liked the painting so much that he had it photographed by Livernois and used it as a kind of visiting card, showing this is what I can do. Almost there again, photo being in competition with painting, and then you photograph the painting and you create a kind of very ambivalent type of thing. In the back of it, he wrote, paint from life, precisely because of the ambiguity. You see, to stress the fact that it was paint, it's not a photo, it's not painted from a photo, but it's painted from life. I think more interesting than this painting, it is when we go a little bit closer to our time, it is this Madame la Bonté, painted by Ozias Le Duc. And again, this is a kind of complex story about this painting. It was done toward the end of the life of Le Duc. You see by the date, 1944. He was, at that moment, starting to work in this big project in Shawinigan. You remember I showed you some of his picture there of workers in the aluminum and also in the wood and things, and in the paper. And he was then working there with Gabriel Messier, who was his assistant, let's say, a younger painter that was working with him. And he got the visit of one resident of Shawinigan South, where he was, Monsieur Loranger. that come with him with a photo of this lady, and he asks Ozias-Leduc if he can paint the portrait of his grandmother that died. But being himself a photographer, he says, I have a photo of her, and could you do, from the photo, could you do a portrait? So he says, you or Madame Messier, he says, I don't care, one of you could do it. So Gabrielle Messier did it, because she's the assistant, and Leduc has something else to do. And after, when they finished, they presented it to Monsieur Loranger, and he said, oh my God, it's not good. It's too artistic, he says. He wanted something really realistic, and it was too artistic. So Monsieur Leduc was nice and said, well, okay, let me correct it a little bit, and you will appreciate it in a few weeks. I will give it to you. So Leduc repainted it a little bit, and the guy came again. He says, oh non, ça marche pas, c'est pas bon. I don't like it. I cannot. And so Leduc got a little bit mad at him, and he says, if you want a photograph of your grandmother, why you don't do it yourself? Huh? He said, I made a painting, I don't make a photograph. So Leduc got stuck with the picture. He could not sell it. So he came back in Saint-Hilaire with it and decided to transform it. We have the photo that was given by Monsieur Loranger, and you will see the difference. This is the photo that Loranger brought to Leduc, and this is the finished painting. And of course, he doesn't call it Madame Loranger anymore. He calls it Madame La Bonté. He invented a name. It's not her name. It's in a way, it's a way to express what he wanted to express in her face, that she have kindness. She's Madame Kindness, if you want, instead of this old lady that you see in the photograph. And so he transformed it. He opened her eyes a little bit more. He suppressed all the things around her that was not in the picture, and he created a much more interesting picture than what he had to do, in fact. And it was bought, in fact, in 1953 by the Museum of Quebec when Gérard Morisset was the curator at the time. He visited Ozias-Leduc and said, oh, this is a nice portrait. Oui, c'est un portrait de Madame La Bonté. And it went like this. This is a kind of interesting story about this picture of an old lady. And I will finish with somebody much closer to us, with Jean-Paul Lemieux. And the Golden Wedding, in which you see an old couple. I put it on a black background because the background of the painting is all white, so you would not have seen it properly. And here, the best thing I can do is to read as a commentary what Lemieux himself said about this painting, how he came out to have it. And he says, I try to express the life of a French-Canadian couple with its joy and its sorrows. The woman is a cousin of mine, with her dropping eyelids. She has a nice smile, but look, she has no teeth. Well, pardon me. The man looks austere. In fact, he's a little boring, as you can see by his mouth. He doesn't forget easily. She's a little disappointed by life and kept a certain bitterness of it all. The crucifix signifies that all their life has been under the influence of religion, of a too rigorous religion. They are depicted sitting on a bench. I don't mean that they are in church. For me, this is irrelevant. It is the spirit of the painting that counts. I like to paint old people, says Lemieux. I admire since long time the art of Ivan Laurent Albright. I don't know if you know this painter. It's an American painter. This contemporary American painter who distort his model and present them all decomposed. I don't like, however, his morbid side. Yeah. If you see Ivan Laurent Albright, you will be very surprised. I should have had a reproduction, but I didn't have. And I put to him, he says, my whole characters are simply old and marked by life. I put to him, to the man, a red carnation for this great day, 50 years of marriage, and for a moment I tried to forget their lack of communication between them, the distance. Golden Wedding, it's quite a feast. I wanted first to paint an old man, and then his wife to complete the composition. I wanted to paint something I have seen a few days before. Walking near the presbytery one day, I saw the vicar sitting with his hat, and nearby, at the other end of the balcony, his maid. in black dress with white spots. Both were very dry, even if they were not slim. They were not sitting together. They were not speaking either to each other. This is not done, as you know. I thought I will paint that. And then I changed my mind. I often change my mind like this. So you see the theme, of course, is alienation of the couple, of the old vicar with his maid. They are not speaking together. They are far apart. And then he transposes it in the whole couple here also. They don't look at each other. They are each one immersed in their own world. And Lemieux have always stressed the fact that he's interested in this expression of time, of space also, of course, but time also is one of the themes. And I don't have color reproduction of that, but it's a good idea. It gives a good idea of that. It is the life of Amélie in one picture. If you start on the right, she's like a child, and then a young lady, and then finally an old lady at the other hand. This is like the passage of time, let's say, represented by a painting. You can do it in cinema now, but for a painter, the only way to do it is by juxtaposing many pictures. Like this Lavater that I mentioned from time to time. I've done it for whole man. You see, if you follow all the pictures, he ends up at the end like really better be dead before going to that level. I think what really is behind the inspiration of Lemieux, it's more this kind of popular type of representation, what we call image d'Épinal. Épinal is a city in France where they were producing these lithographs, and they call it here les degrés des âges, because on the left you are climbing toward a certain level, and then after, I will not say what age, let's say 80, 70, you begin to go down. No, but a little bit before that, apparently. And then you end up in your bed under, as you see on the bottom there, and you have a devil and an angel getting your soul to the last judgment that is represented under the stairs. So I think this is more or less what Lemieux had in mind. He make a kind of modern version of this idea. And this gave me also a transition to my last lecture next week, because I said, okay, I finished with the stage of life. What can I do? I said, well, we'll speak of afterlife. You see. So that will be the last subject, a little bit suggested by this Épinal picture, how we represented the life after death, let's say, both in the tradition of European and Canadian tradition, and also with the natives, you'll see, who have a completely different point of view. Okay, thank you.